Would you like more tea, Mrs. Gable? The hibiscus is particularly sharp today. The voice belonged to the young woman sitting across from me, a woman who didn't realize that in my house, silence is a more potent ingredient than sugar. I let the steam from my cup drift upward, clouding my vision for a brief second before I focused on her. She was tapping her pen against a leather-bound planner, a rhythmic, impatient sound that told me everything about her internal clock. "The tea is fine, Miss Sarah," I replied, my voice holding the steady, low resonance of a woman who has spent 66 years learning how to breathe through her nose when others are panting for air. "But we aren't here to discuss the brew. We are here because my grandson, Leo, came home yesterday with a bruise on his spirit and a note in his bag." Miss Sarah offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile people give when they think they are explaining the world to someone who has already seen it end and begin again 3 times over. "He's a sensitive boy, but as I told you over the phone, there was an incident. My prescription glasses were broken during his recess period. They were quite expensive. Designer frames." I set my cup down. The ceramic hit the saucer with a dull, final thud. I looked at the way she sat, spine straight, chin tilted slightly too high, the posture of someone who mistook authority for respect. She was the star educator of the academy, the one the board praised for her firm hand and modern standards. To me, she looked like a girl playing dress-up in a room full of heirlooms she didn't know how to polish. "Expensive," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a heavy curtain. It's a curious word to use when speaking to a grandmother about a child. You see, Sarah, I've spent my life measuring value in things that don't have price tags. But I am an observant woman. I noticed the way you didn't look at Leo when he apologized. I noticed how your hand stayed on your hip while he cried. And I noticed that the frames on your face right now, they don't look broken at all. The tapping stopped. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thickening with the scent of dried lavender and the sudden, sharp shift in her demeanor. She didn't expect me to be looking at her face. She expected me to be looking at my feet, apologizing for the trouble my grandson had caused her pristine life. "I had a spare pair, of course," she said, her voice tightening at the edges. "But that doesn't change the liability. The school has a policy. If a student destroys personal property of a faculty member through negligence, the family is responsible for the replacement. I've already filed the paperwork with the administration. I thought coming here, person to person, would be kinder, to give you a chance to settle it before it becomes a permanent mark on his record." Kinder. That was the word that signaled the shift. It was a threat wrapped in velvet, a classic move for someone who thinks the elderly are easy targets for a little light extortion. She saw a black woman in a quiet house with lace doilies and assumed she was looking at a bank account she could bully. She didn't see the woman who managed the logistics of a municipal firm for 30 years. She didn't see the woman who knew exactly how much those designer frames actually cost, and more importantly, how they were supposedly broken. "I appreciate the visit," I said, my tone remaining as smooth as polished river stone. "It's always helpful to see the person who is shaping my grandson's future. Leo told me he tripped. He told me you were standing very close behind him when he fell. He said he felt a hand on his shoulder right before his world went blurry." Miss Sarah stood up, her leather planner clutched to her chest like a shield. "Children often misremember details when they are in trouble, Mrs. Gable. It's a defense mechanism. I'll expect the reimbursement by Friday. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can't guarantee his placement in the honors track for next semester. We value accountability here." She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors with a sharp, disrespectful bite. I didn't get up. I didn't need to. I simply watched her back. Accountability is a double-edged sword, Sarah, I called out softly. It cuts the hand that holds it if they aren't careful. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the brass knob. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders tense. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully squeezed a few $1,000s out of a retiree to cover her own clumsy mistake, or perhaps something more calculated. She closed the door, leaving me in the silence of my living room. I picked up my tea, which was still warm. I didn't feel anger. Anger is a fire that burns out too quickly. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. She had made a mistake. She had invited me into a game I had been playing since before she was a thought in her mother's mind. I looked over at the small framed photograph of Leo on the mantel. He was a good boy, a quiet boy, and he was my only vulnerability. By touching him, she had given me permission to dismantle her. But it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be a scene in a principal's office. It would be a slow, methodical peeling back of the layers she used to hide who she really was. I pulled a small black notebook from the side table. I didn't write down her name. I wrote down the date, the time, and the brand of the glasses she was currently wearing. Something felt wrong about the way she moved. Something felt hidden. And in my experience, people who try to extort grandmothers usually have a closet full of ghosts just waiting for someone to open the door. I have all the time in the world. And Sarah? She's on a very tight schedule. The neighborhood was draped in the kind of morning fog that turns everything into a charcoal sketch. I stood at my kitchen window, a damp cloth in my hand, watching the yellow school bus pull away. Leo's face had been a pale moon pressed against the glass. He didn't wave today. He just watched the house shrink away, his eyes heavy with the kind of guilt that doesn't belong on a 10-year-old's shoulders. I turned back to my kitchen table. Spread out before me wasn't a crossword puzzle or a knitting project, but a series of printed bank statements and the school's Faculty Honor Code handbook. Most people see a teacher as a fixed point in a child's life, a moral compass. I see them as employees, and employees, especially those with expensive tastes and designer frames, always leave a trail. Control, I whispered to the empty room. It's never about the object, it's about the leverage. I spent the morning in my study. The air in there smells of old paper and the cedar of my desk, a place where I've balanced books for decades. I began my search not with the incident, but with the glasses themselves. Miss Sarah had claimed they were a specific Italian brand, a boutique label that prides itself on exclusivity. They retail for $1,200 without the lenses. A steep price for a woman on a public school salary, even at a prestigious academy. As I accessed the school's public financial filings, the ones they have to provide for their non-profit status. I wasn't looking for her name. I was looking for the discretionary fund allocations. It's a quiet little corner of a budget where small thefts go to hide. If Sarah was as modern and firm as she claimed, she likely felt she was owed a certain lifestyle for her brilliance. By noon, I found the first inconsistency. A series of reimbursements for classroom supplies that coincided perfectly with her vacation schedule. Small amounts. $200 here, $150 there. Enough to fly under the radar of a busy administrator, but to a woman who has spent 30 years spotting a missing cent in a $1 million ledger, it was a neon sign. But that wasn't the leverage. That was just the character study. The real shift happened when I looked into the school's insurance policy regarding personal property. I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking. The policy stated that the school covers 100% of faculty property damage if it occurs during instructional hours provided a witness statement is filed. Sarah hadn't told the school Leo broke her glasses. She had told them she misplaced them, while simultaneously telling me Leo destroyed them. She was double dipping. She wanted the school's insurance to buy her a new pair, and she wanted me to pay for a second pair out of pocket. It was a classic squeeze. She saw a grandmother and thought she saw a silent ATM. I checked the time. It was nearly 2 p.m. I dressed in my best navy suit, the one with the sharp lapels that makes me look like a retired judge. I didn't head to the school. Instead, I drove to a small optical boutique 3 towns over. It was the only place in the state that carried that Italian brand. The shop was quiet, smelling of sterile glass and high-end perfume. The young man behind the counter looked up, his eyes scanning my sensible shoes and my old-fashioned handbag. He saw a grandmother. I let him. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice soft but certain. "I'm looking for a replacement screw for a pair of frames. A friend of mine, a teacher named Sarah, mentioned she gets her work done here. She's quite fond of the designer line you carry." The young man smiled, the professional mask sliding into place. "Ah, yes. I remember her. Though she hasn't been in for a year. We actually stopped carrying that line 6 months ago because of a defect in the hinges." I felt the click in my mind, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "A defect? So they break easily?" "On their own, usually," he said, leaning in. "The heat causes the plastic to stress. Most people think they sat on them, but they just snap." I thanked him and left. As I sat in my car, the engine idling, I looked at the school's handbook again. Fraudulent claims regarding school-related incidents are grounds for immediate termination. Sarah didn't just want my money. She was using my grandson to cover up the fact that she had broken her own expensive, defective glasses, and she was trying to profit from the accident. She was willing to put a permanent mark on a child's record to fund her vanity. I felt a cold, sharp ripple of satisfaction. She thought she was playing a game of power. She didn't realize she was playing a game of survival, and I had already taken her queen. But I wouldn't move yet. A quick strike allows for a quick recovery. No, I needed Sarah to feel the weight of her own lies first. I needed her to believe she was winning. I pulled out my phone and sent a short, polite text to the number she had given me. "Miss Sarah, I have the funds for the glasses. I would like to bring them to the school tomorrow afternoon to settle this quietly, as you suggested. I'll meet you in your classroom after the students depart." The reply came back almost instantly. "That would be best for Leo. See you at 4 o'clock." I looked at the screen. The trap wasn't just set. She had walked into it and closed the door behind herself. Tomorrow, the star educator would learn that when you try to break a child, you shouldn't do it in front of a woman who knows how to fix things. The drive home was peaceful. I even turned on the radio. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, thin shadows across the road. The truth is, a lot like that light. It stretches everything out until you can see the real shape of things. I had 24 hours, and in those 24 hours, Sarah would spend every minute imagining how she'd spend my money. She wouldn't be looking at her files. She wouldn't be checking the insurance logs. She would be comfortable. The hallway of the academy smelled of floor wax and the faint, metallic tang of filtered air. At 4 p.m., the building breathes differently. The frantic energy of the children is gone, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. I walked down the corridor toward room 212, my footsteps muffled by the thick industrial carpet. I didn't carry a purse. I carried a thin, manila folder tucked under my arm like a secret. When I reached the door, I didn't knock immediately. I watched through the narrow glass pane. Sarah was at her desk, the light from her computer screen reflecting off those expensive frames. She was humming, a light, airy tune that grated against the gravity of the situation. She looked remarkably relaxed for someone who was about to commit a small-scale extortion. I tapped twice. Sharp. Rhythmic. "Come in," she called out, her voice bright with the anticipation of a payday. I stepped inside. The room was organized with a cold, clinical precision. "Good afternoon, Sarah. You look quite comfortable." "Mrs. Gable," she said, leaning back in her swivel chair. The chair creaked, a small, cheap sound in a room that tried so hard to look high-end. "I'm glad you're here. I was just reviewing Leo's file. He's such a bright boy. It would be a shame for his record to reflect a lack of personal responsibility." I took the seat opposite her without being asked. I placed the folder on her desk, right over her nameplate. "Responsibility is a heavy word, Sarah. It's a shame people use it as a weapon when they should be using it as a mirror." Her smile faltered, just a fraction. "I assume you have the reimbursement? I can provide a handwritten receipt for your records." "I have something better than a receipt," I said, my voice dropping into a lower, more resonant register. "I have the truth, and in my experience, the truth is much more valuable than $1,200. I opened the folder. I didn't show her money. I showed her a printout from the school's internal insurance portal, the one I'd spent the previous evening exploring through a few public access loopholes I'd learned during my years in administration. Sarah's eyes darted to the page. Her face didn't go pale, it went still. That's the sign of a practiced liar. They don't panic. They calculate. "This is an insurance claim," I said, pointing to the line item. "Filed yesterday at 5:15 p.m. for the exact same pair of glasses you're asking me to pay for. You told the board they were damaged by a facility malfunction, a door that swung too quickly in the faculty lounge. No mention of a 10-year-old boy." The silence in the room became absolute. The hum of the computer seemed to grow louder, a digital snarl. "I don't know where you got that," she whispered, her voice losing its polished edge. "That's private school documentation. Accessing that is illegal." "What's illegal, Sarah, is insurance fraud," I replied, leaning forward. "And what's immoral is using a child's fear to pay your credit card bills. I visited the boutique in Sterling Heights today, the one that used to carry these frames. The young man there was very helpful. He remembered you. He also remembered that those hinges have a known manufacturing defect. They don't break because a boy trips. They break because they were designed to fail." She tried to stand, but I didn't move. I kept my eyes locked on hers, a steady, unblinking pressure. "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. She sat. "You've been playing a very small, very sloppy game," I continued. "You've been skimming from the supply budget to fund your weekend trips. And now you're trying to double settle a claim for a pair of glasses that were already broken before Leo ever stepped foot in your classroom. You didn't see a grandmother when you looked at me. You saw a shortcut." "What do you want?" she spat, the mask finally falling away. Her face was twisted now, revealing the sharp, ugly angles of her desperation. "You want the money? You want me to drop the incident? Fine, it's done. Just get out of my office." I smiled then. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who has already finished the hunt and is simply enjoying the quiet of the forest. "Oh, Sarah, if I wanted it to be done, I wouldn't have come here at all. I would have just sent this folder to the Board of Trustees this morning. But I'm a woman who believes in the process. I want you to feel the weight of the next few days. I want you to wonder every time the phone rings, or a shadow passes your door, if today is the day your world collapses. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I left the folder on her desk. I'm not paying you a cent, I said, walking toward the door. And as for Leo, he won't be in your class tomorrow, or ever again. But you? You'll be here, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I paused at the door, mimicking her stance from the day before. By the way, that tune you were humming, it's The Carnival of the Animals, specifically the movement for the fossils. Very fitting. I walked out, the click of my heels echoing through the empty halls. I didn't look back. I knew she was staring at that folder, or realizing that she hadn't just lost the money, she had lost the one thing a manipulator cannot live without, the illusion of control. The air in my garden was cool the next morning, the smell of damp earth and mint providing a clarity that a younger woman might have found unsettling. I spent the morning pruning the roses. It's a delicate task. One must know exactly where to snip so the plant doesn't bleed, but rather gathers its strength to bloom elsewhere. Sarah was currently at the school, I imagined, sitting in that same swivel chair. She would be looking at the students, wondering which one of them had a grandmother like me. She would be looking at the principal, wondering if he'd received an anonymous email yet. The beauty of a slow burn payback is that the target does most of the heavy lifting for you. Their own guilt and paranoia are far more efficient than any confrontation. At 10 a.m., I went back inside and poured a glass of cold water. I sat at my desk and pulled out a list of the school's major donors. It was public information, buried in the annual gala program. I recognized several names, prominent families who prided themselves on the integrity of the academy. I didn't call them to complain. That would be emotional. That would be drama. Instead, I reached out to a woman I'd known for 40 years, Esther. Esther worked as the head of housekeeping for the town's most influential lawyer, a man whose children were the crown jewels of Sarah's honors track. Esther, dear, I said when she picked up. I was just thinking about that lovely centerpiece you made for the church social. And I was wondering, have you heard anything about the school's new replacement policy for faculty? It seems so unusual. I didn't have to say more. In our community, information travels like a subterranean river, quiet, deep, and unstoppable. I shared the story of the glasses, not as a grievance, but as a concern for the other parents. I mentioned, quite casually, that it seemed the school was struggling so much with its budget that teachers were now forced to ask grandparents for cash to cover accidents. By noon, the seeds were planted. At 1:30 p.m., I received a phone call. It wasn't Sarah. It was the assistant principal, a man who sounded like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "Mrs. Gable?" he began, his voice strained. "I'm calling regarding a misunderstanding involving Miss Sarah and your grandson. It seems there was some confusion about a property damage claim." "Confusion?" I asked, my voice as smooth as silk. "I'm not confused at all." Sarah was very clear. She needed $1,200 for her designer frames, and she suggested that Leo's future depended on my cooperation. I assumed this was standard procedure for the academy now. I was actually just discussing it with some of the neighborhood families. We were thinking of starting a collection for the faculty. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The last thing a private academy wants is the prominent families thinking the school is so broke or so corrupt that the teachers are panhandling from the elderly. That won't be necessary," he said quickly. "We are looking into the matter internally. Miss Sarah is currently on administrative leave while we review some discrepancies in her filings." "Discrepancies," I repeated, letting the word linger. That sounds serious. I hope everything is settled fairly. I'd hate for the school's reputation to be tarnished by one person's ambition. I hung up. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I felt the quiet, steady hum of a machine working exactly as it was designed to. Sarah had relied on my silence. She had relied on the idea that an old woman would be too confused or too embarrassed to speak up. She had forgotten that the oldest trees in the forest have the deepest roots. I went to the kitchen and began preparing Leo's favorite dinner, smothered chicken and greens. He would be home soon. He didn't know that his permanent mark had already vanished. He didn't know that the woman who made him cry was currently sitting in a cold office, trying to explain why she had two different stories for a broken pair of glasses. But the administrative leave was just the beginning. A woman like Sarah, someone who steals from the supply closet and bullies children, always has a larger secret. People who are that greedy are never satisfied with small thefts. I sat down and opened my laptop. I had spent 30 years in municipal logistics, tracking every gallon of fuel and every ton of asphalt for the city. I knew how to find the ghosts in a payroll. Sarah had a sister who lived in the city. A sister who, according to the school's public directory, had been hired as a remote curriculum consultant 2 years ago. I did a quick search of the sister's social media. She was currently on a beach in Bali. She hadn't posted anything about education or curriculum in years. She was, however, posting about her new business venture, funded by a generous private grant. I leaned back, the light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. "Double-dipping on glasses was your mistake, Sarah," I whispered. "But the payroll? That's going to be your legacy." I didn't send an email. I didn't make a scene. I simply printed out the sister's LinkedIn profile and the school's payroll allocation for consultant services. I put them in a fresh manila envelope. I wasn't going to send this one to the school. I was going to wait. I wanted to see if Sarah would try to fight her leave. I wanted to see if she would try to blame Leo one last time. The silence of the house was broken by the sound of the school bus. I stood up, smoothing my apron. I had a grandson to feed. And Sarah? Sarah had a fire to put out, only she didn't realize I was the one holding the matches. The smell of smothered chicken filled the house, a warm, savory blanket that seemed to settle Leo's nerves. He ate in silence for a while, his eyes darting to me every so often, as if looking for a storm that hadn't arrived. Children are intuitive. They know when the air has changed, even if they don't know why. "Grandma," he said, pushing a bit of gravy around his plate. "The principal came to my room today. He said I'm moving to Mrs. Henderson's class starting tomorrow. He said Miss Sarah is taking a break." I wiped a spot of water from the table with my thumb. "Sometimes, Leo, people need to step away to remember how to be decent. You don't need to worry about the glasses anymore. They were old, and they were already broken. It was a mistake for her to make you feel otherwise." He let out a breath he'd been holding since Monday. "I didn't mean to trip, Grandma. I really didn't." "I know, baby. Eat your greens." After he went to bed, I sat on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. I watched a car turn the corner, a sleek, white sedan that didn't belong on this block. It slowed down as it passed my house, the headlights sweeping over my manicured lawn like a searchlight. It didn't stop, but the driver's intent was clear. Sarah was hunting. She wasn't at home reflecting on her administrative leave. She was spiraling. When you take the floor out from under a person who thinks they are superior, they don't usually fall gracefully. They reach out and try to grab whatever, or whomever, is closest. My phone vibrated on the side table. An unknown number. I let it ring. Then a text message came through. I know what you're doing. You're trying to ruin a career over a pair of glasses. I have friends on the board. You think you're smart, but you're just an old woman who doesn't understand how the world works now. Stop talking to the parents, or I'll make sure Leo never gets into another private school in this state. I looked at the screen, my face illuminated by the blue light. It was a tactical error. She was documented now, harassing a grandmother, threatening a child's educational future. It was the move of a woman who had run out of clever plays and was resorting to blunt force. I didn't reply. Silence is a mirror. It reflects a person's own ugliness back at them until they can't stand the sight. I went back inside and walked to my study. I opened the manila envelope I'd prepared earlier, the one containing the payroll records and the consultant sister's social media trail. I added one more thing, a screenshot of the text she had just sent me. I began to think about the friends on the board she mentioned. I knew who they were. One was a local developer, another a retired dentist. They weren't her friends. They were her audience. She performed for them, played the part of the dedicated modern educator, and in return, they gave her a long leash. But men like that don't like messy. They like prestige. They like their names associated with excellence, not insurance fraud and embezzlement. And I spent the next hour mapping out the school's board of directors. I wasn't looking for a friend. I was looking for the person with the most to lose. I found him. Mr. Sterling. No, a man whose name I wouldn't let clutter my mind. Let's call him the chairman. He was a man who had donated the library in his late wife's honor. He valued legacy above all else. If he found out that his library was being funded by the same budget Sarah was skimming from, his reaction wouldn't be friendly, it would be surgical. The next morning, I didn't go to the school. I went to the library, the one the chairman had built. I sat in the reference section, a quiet, observant figure among the stacks. I waited for him to arrive for his weekly walk-through, a vanity ritual he performed every Wednesday. When he appeared, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car, I didn't approach him. I simply sat at a table near the entrance, the manila folder resting clearly in front of me. I was reading a book on local history, looking every bit the peaceful retiree. As he passed, I looked up and offered a small, polite nod. It's a beautiful building, sir, a real testament to the value of honest work. He paused, a practiced smile on his face. Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I am, I said, my voice steady. Though it's a shame about the recent audits, I was just reading about the consultancy fees. It's a lot of money for someone living in Bali, don't you think? His smile didn't just falter, it vanished. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He saw a woman who wasn't afraid of him, a woman who knew exactly what was inside that envelope. Who are you? He asked, his voice low. I'm a grandmother who values accountability, I replied. And I think you and I have a common interest in making sure this library's name stays clean. Wouldn't you agree? I pushed the folder toward him across the oak table. I'm not looking for money. I'm looking for a correction. Sarah has been a very expensive mistake for all of us. He didn't take the folder immediately. He looked at me for a long time, trying to find the angle. But there was no angle, just a straight line from her actions to his consequences. I'll look into this, he said, finally taking the envelope. I'm sure you will, I said, standing up. Because if you don't, I'll have to discuss these consultancy fees with the local paper. And I'd hate for your wife's name to be mentioned in a story about stolen school funds. I walked out of the library, the cool morning air hitting my face. The reach had been made. The chairman was now the one holding the bag. And Sarah? She was still waiting at home, thinking her friends would save her. The weekend arrived with a deceptive stillness. I spent Saturday morning polishing my silver, the repetitive motion of the cloth against the metal acting as a form of meditation. In my experience, when you've set a fire in the brush, you don't need to fan it. You simply sit on your porch and watch the smoke rise. By noon, the smoke was visible. I received a call from a woman named Diane. She was the mother of the girl who sat next to Leo in class, a woman who lived for the social hierarchy of the school. Her voice was a frantic whisper, the sound of someone who had just tasted the first bite of a very bitter fruit. "Mrs. Gable, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she began, though we both knew she was. "But have you heard? There was a board meeting this morning, an emergency session. They say the police were seen at the administrative building. Something about the payroll." I held the silver cream cloth poised over a spoon. "Is that so? I suppose even the most polished floors can hide a great deal of dust, Diane." "They're saying Miss Sarah didn't just misplace funds. They're saying she was running a whole second ledger. And the chairman? They say he looked like he'd seen a ghost when he walked out. He's personally overseeing the audit now." "Accountability is rarely a comfortable process," I said, my tone as flat as a prairie. "But it is necessary for the health of the school." After I hung up, I felt a slight tug of something that wasn't quite pity. It was more like the feeling you get when you see a glass ornament shatter. You don't feel bad for the glass. You just acknowledge that it was always too fragile for the shelf it was placed on. Sarah had spent years building a pedestal out of other people's reputations and her own perceived brilliance. She hadn't realized that the higher you build, the more the wind wants to pull you down. I checked my email. I had a message from an anonymous sender, a forward of an internal memo sent to the faculty. It was brief. "Effective immediately, Sarah is no longer affiliated with the academy. We ask that all staff refrain from discussing ongoing legal matters with the press or parents." The phrase "legal matters" was the killing blow. It meant they weren't just letting her go with a quiet severance and a recommendation. They were protecting themselves by handing her over to the system. The chairman had chosen his legacy over her friendship, but Sarah wasn't done. A woman like that doesn't go into the dark without trying to take a light with her. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. Not the rhythmic tap of a friend, but a heavy, frantic pounding that shook the frame. I didn't hurry. I finished drying the spoon I was holding, placed it in the velvet-lined drawer, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. Sarah was standing there. She wasn't wearing her designer frames today. Her eyes were red. Her hair was uncharacteristically messy, and she was wearing a coat that was buttoned unevenly. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 48 hours realizing that the world didn't owe her a thing. I opened the door, but I left the screen locked. "You did this," she hissed. Her voice was no longer the melodic, modern tone of an educator. It was raw and jagged. "You went to the chairman. You dug into things that weren't your business. You've destroyed my life over $1,000 mistake." I looked at her, my expression as calm as a deep well. "You destroyed your life, Sarah, when you decided that my grandson's dignity was a price you were willing to pay for a new pair of glasses. I didn't create the payroll files. I didn't hire your sister for a job she wasn't doing. I simply shone a light on the things you were already doing in the dark." "I'll sue you," she whispered, her hands shaking as she gripped the handle of the screen door. "I'll tell everyone you harassed me. I'll make sure you're known as the woman who ruined the school's reputation." "The school's reputation was ruined the moment they hired a thief to teach children about honor," I replied. And as for suing, I think you'll find that your legal fees will be quite high as it is. Perhaps you should save your energy for the deposition. I hear the chairman isn't feeling particularly generous these days. She screamed then, a wordless, frustrated sound of a child who had finally been told no. It was the loudest she had ever been, and it was the weakest she had ever looked. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said softly. I closed the heavy oak door. I heard her sobbing on the porch, a thin, pathetic sound. Then I heard her footsteps as she ran back to her car. I didn't look out the window to see her leave. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what her departure looked like. It looked like a consequence. I walked into the kitchen and began to peel potatoes for dinner. Leo would be home soon. He was thriving in Mrs. Henderson's class. He had told me that morning that his new teacher laughed when he told a joke. He felt safe. And safety, I realized, was the only thing worth fighting for. Everything else, the money, the designer frames, the fancy titles, it was all just glass. And glass always snaps when the stress gets too high. The trap had closed, but the final revelation was still to come. You see, Sarah thought she was the only one with secrets. She didn't realize that in a small town, everyone is connected. And the person who really signed her sister's payroll checks wasn't just Sarah. It was someone who was still sitting in that building. Someone who thought they were safe because they had sacrificed her. The house felt lighter after Sarah's visit, as if the walls themselves had let out a long-held breath. But I am not a woman who stops at the symptoms when the disease is still present. Sarah was the fever. The chairman and his administrative board were the infection. I sat at my desk, the black notebook open. I had been thinking about the consultancy fees. A teacher doesn't have the authority to add a phantom employee to a private school's payroll. She might have provided the name, but someone with a master key to the digital treasury had to turn the lock. I pulled up the last few years of the Academy's public financial disclosures. I wasn't looking for Sarah's name anymore. I was looking for the signature that authorized the Curriculum Development Fund. Every 3 months, a payment of $4,500 had been sent to a holding company in the city. A holding company that shared a registered address with the chairman's own real estate firm. I felt a cold thrill of recognition. Sarah wasn't just a thief. She was a distraction. She was a small fish swimming in a very deep, very dark pond. The chairman hadn't been angry that she was stealing. He was terrified because her clumsy attempt to extort me had drawn a spotlight to the very books he was cooking. I spent the afternoon in a state of quiet, focused movement. I didn't need to dig through trash or hack into servers. I simply used the skills I'd honed over 30 years, pattern recognition. I cross-referenced the dates of the school's capital campaigns with the chairman's personal property acquisitions. Every time a new wing was built at the school, a new luxury condo appeared in the chairman's portfolio. He wasn't just a donor, he was a parasite. At 3 p.m., I received a visit from the assistant principal. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, looking at me with a mixture of awe and genuine fear. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice cracking. "I came to tell you that Leo's records have been sanitized. Every mention of the incident with the glasses has been removed. We've also decided to grant him a full academic scholarship for the remainder of his time here. It's the least we can do for the— I stress this has caused your family." I didn't invite him in. I stood behind the screen, a shadow in the doorway. A scholarship is a fine gesture, but silence cannot be bought with a child's tuition. It is earned through total transparency. He swallowed hard. "The chairman, he's very concerned about transparency. He's hired an outside firm to audit the entire staff." "An outside firm he pays for?" I asked. That's like asking the fox to count the chickens and provide a report on the feathers. The assistant principal looked away. He knew. Everyone in that building knew. But they were all held together by a web of mutual benefit and fear. They thought that by offering me a scholarship for Leo, I would go back to my roses and my silver and forget that I had seen the ghost in the machine. "Tell the chairman I received his gift," I said, "and tell him that I am a woman who pays her debts. He'll understand what I mean." When he left, I went to my computer. I didn't send an email to the police. I didn't call the board. I went to the one place where truth cannot be managed or sanitized, the State Department of Revenue. I had worked with them for decades during my time in municipal logistics. I knew exactly which form to file to trigger a whistleblower inquiry regarding non-profit status and misappropriation of educational grants. I attached the payroll records, the holding company address, and the chairman's signature. I didn't add a note of grievance. I just provided the data. As I clicked send, I thought about Sarah. She was currently at home, likely packing her bags, thinking she was the victim of a vindictive grandmother. She didn't realize that she was merely the loose thread I had pulled to unravel the entire tapestry. The chairman thought he was safe because he was at the top. He thought he could sacrifice Sarah and buy my silence. He underestimated the fact that I don't care about his library, or his name, or his legacy. I care about the fact that he allowed a woman to terrorize a 10-year-old boy to protect his own pocketbook. The sun began to set, casting long orange bars across my study floor. I felt a profound sense of peace. The trap was no longer just for the teacher. The entire institution was now under the lens. Tomorrow, the auditors wouldn't be the ones the chairman hired. They would be the ones with badges and subpoenas. They would find the consultancy fees. They would find the condo links. And they would find that the star educator was just the beginning of the rot. I closed my laptop and walked into the kitchen. I had a grandson to help with his homework. He was learning about the laws of physics, specifically that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The morning didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with the sound of a heavy engine idling at the curb. I sat by my window, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, watching the black sedans pull into the school's circular drive. There were no sirens. There was no shouting. There were only men in dark suits carrying briefcases, the modern-day equivalent of a firing squad. I watched the chairman being led out of the side entrance an hour later. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but the way he clutched his briefcase to his chest told the story. He looked small. Without the backdrop of his mahogany office and the shield of his legacy, he was just an old man who had forgotten that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has been watching in silence. My phone chimed. It was a news alert from the local Gazette. State authorities launch forensic audit into academy finances. Chairman steps down amid embezzlement allegations. I set the phone down. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. I looked at the lines around my eyes, each one a map of a year lived, a lesson learned. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. The scales were finally level. Sarah was gone, her name now a cautionary tale whispered in the faculty lounge. The chairman was a ghost, his library likely to be renamed by the end of the year. And Leo? Leo was in the kitchen, hot eating his cereal and humming a tune that wasn't the carnival of the animals. He was humming something bright, something new. He came into the living room, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, the shadow in his eyes was gone. "Ready, Grandma?" he asked. "Ready, baby," I said, standing up. I walked him to the bus stop. We stood together in the crisp morning air, the world moving around us as it always had. The neighbours nodded as they passed. Some looked at me with a new kind of curiosity, perhaps wondering how a woman who spends her days pruning roses managed to bring down a fortress. I just smiled back, a polite, grandmotherly smile that revealed nothing. As the yellow bus pulled up, Leo paused. He looked at the school building in the distance, then back at me. Grandma, did you fix it? It the thing with the glasses? I reached out and smoothed the collar of his shirt. No, Leo. You can't fix things that are designed to break. I just made sure that when they finally snapped, they didn't take you down with them. He hugged me, a quick, fierce squeeze, and ran up the steps of the bus. I watched him find his seat and wave. This time I waved back until the bus disappeared around the corner. I walked back to my house, the silence of the morning a comfort rather than a weight. I stepped onto my porch and looked at my garden. The roses were thriving, the soil was rich, and the air was finally clear. Sarah had made the mistake of thinking I was a victim because I was old and quiet. She didn't realize that being quiet is a choice. It's a strategy. It allows you to hear the cracks in the foundation before the building falls. I went inside and picked up my black notebook. I turned to the last page. I didn't write a name. I didn't write a sum of money. I simply wrote one word. Accounted. I closed the book and placed it back in the drawer of my cedar desk. The sun was high now, pouring through the windows and illuminating every corner of the room. There were no more shadows here, no more secrets. Just the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. People like Sarah and the chairman spend their lives trying to outrun time. They think they can build walls high enough to keep the truth at bay. But the truth is, like the tide. It doesn't matter how high the wall is, the water always finds the crack. I sat in my favourite chair and picked up my knitting. The yarn was a deep, royal blue. It was a slow process, stitch by stitch. But that's the only way to make something that lasts. After all, in the game of payback, it's never about who strikes first. It's about who is still standing when the dust finally settles. And as I looked out at my quiet, peaceful street, I knew exactly where I stood. If you enjoyed this story of calculated justice, make sure to subscribe to Old School Payback. Leave a comment below if you've ever had to show someone that quiet doesn't mean weak. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your circle small.